approves of the imperial system, and Tacitus really disapproves of the imperial system. He would like Rome to go back to a republic as it was before Augustus. So, 140 years before Tacitus is writing. He really thrives under it. It works out surprisingly well. You might not like it, but it's good for him. Would you please welcome to the stage my guests, Llewellyn Morgan, Dan Snow. What is Tacitus doing that earlier historians didn't? Stylistically, he is different.
He is different, but actually you've got to go back to the Greeks, to Herodotus and Thucydides, because those two authors kind of set the scene for how you could do history in a very broad way, and the style that you use for history. So Herodotus has this kind of lovely sort of flowing style, which suggests that everything is okay. I'm simplifying slightly. Thucydides has a much tougher style because he's communicating Greece in civil war. What Tacitus is kind of working against is Livy. Essentially, Livy is encouraging us to think how wonderful the Roman Empire is, how wonderful its development has been. It's beautiful flowing style, very Ciceronian sort of, sentences that disappear over the horizon, and everything is said 3 times in case you don't get it first. Everything totally predictable. But Tacitus' style is this utterly concise, unpredictable kind of Latin. It's kind of Latin that's perfect if you want to communicate that there is. It's not quite the same.
And rhetorical flourishes are all over the place. He will happily end a sentence with some devastating aside that seems unrelated but absolutely undermines what's coming next.
Yeah, it's fabulous.
He's not massively forthcoming about anything in his personal life, really. He mentions that he's married, but he doesn't mention his wife's name. We do know that he is friends with Pliny the Younger, partly because Pliny writes those 2 amazing Pompey letters to him, which we talked about in the Pompey show, but also there's a letter in which he happily offers his feedback on Tacitus's work pre-publication, and he's really glad that Tacitus does that for him too. He's really ready to make changes to his work. Tacitus begins publishing his work around 98, so the very end of the 1st century. 2 monographs, the first things he produces, one on Germany and one on a man named Agricola, a person he deeply admires. Agricola was governor of Britain between 78 and 84, 85, and Tacitus follows a long tradition of Greek biographical writing when he writes about him, so it's practically a eulogy. It's a very uncritical account of Agricola's life. This is incredibly surprising if, like me, you read Tacitus's Annals first at school, and then you come to the Agricola, and you're like, where was this friendly man hiding? The whole time he was accusing literally everyone in the imperial family of being a poisoner. Where was this guy? Yeah, worn out by 99 turns out to be the answer. He's not particularly interested in Agricola's personality, I don't think. It's much more about his career. He does note that Agricola has a daughter. He doesn't mention her name, which is weird because he definitely knew it. He was literally married to her. So the Agricola is of particular interest to us because so much of it focuses on Britain, which is not, always that fascinating for Roman authors. I know we like to see ourselves as the centre of the world. To the Romans, we're sort of a grimy, damp, cold northern outpost. So, hello! So it's nice to have the information that we have in Tacitus. Things he knows that I think people hadn't been sure about before. Britain is an island. Yeah, no, I know. The Roman fleet sail all the way round to check. Best way of doing it, isn't it? It's either that or a very long piece of string. This is probably better. He also knows that the southern part of Britain is within sight of Gaul. That's true, right? Within sight of France. Yes, correct. It's not always as accurate as that. He thinks that we are right next to Spain, with just Ireland between us. Or as I like to call it, the Costa del Cork. He mentions our differing appearances, so he's interested in the kind of anthropological differences of British people. The Caledonians look a lot like the Germans, he says, so well done, Scotland. Some of us resemble Spaniards. How could we not? It's literally next door. We're going to, aren't we? If the ones nearest to Gaul look like Gauls, sounds reasonable enough. He says that Britons get distracted by tribal cooperate with one another. Fun fact, he also notes Boudicca's revolt, which happened when he was just a child under Nero. He's interested in the fact that it's a queen rather than a king. He says that Britons don't discriminate on the grounds of sex, and the good thing is that that's continued to be true for 2 millennia, so great. It is not at all an impartial account. So Tacitus loves Agricola. He's obviously a very devoted son-in-law, and he really blames the emperor Domitian for being jealous when Domitian recalls Agricola from Britain, makes him go back to Rome, and Tacitus says that's because he's jealous of the mighty victory that Agricola has won over a place the Romans called Mona. We know it better as Anglesey. Now, I don't want to diss Anglesey, but at this point in the sort of late 1st century CE, the population of the Roman Empire was pushing 100 million people. The population of Anglesey was just a little bit less than that. So it's not really a sort of equal battle. And although I think it's fair to say it was probably an important strategic interlude in Agricola's time in Britain, I think it's fair to say that really only Anglesey's mum would think that Anglesey was a mighty victory for the Romans. With all love, Anglesey. When Agricola dies suddenly back in Rome, Tacitus starts, as he means to go on when it comes to writing about the imperial family, he suggests that the emperor probably had him poisoned. Evidence? Who needs evidence when you have Tacitus' capacity for persuasive prose? Domitian keeps sending his servants to come and check on how Agricola is. I call that suspicious. Llewellyn, would people have written about their own times at the time that Tacitus is writing about? It's essentially quite a long time, more than a century ago. Was it too risky?
In a sense, Tacitus in the Agricola is writing about his own times. I mean, the problem with Agricola under Domitian, as far as Tacitus is concerned, it hasn't been possible for a great man to get the credit for being a great man, because he has just to go into retirement and hide from Domitian. The fact that Tacitus...
Will no one give him a triumph for his tremendous victory over Anglesey? Is the question. Dan?
I think it's harder than you think to invade Anglesey. Amphibious operations are very difficult in Northwest Wales. There's a hell of a tidal flow in that little flow.
The Bosphorus of the British
It is. Opposed landings,
Yeah.
a tricky place, and the locals, they're up for it.
Furious. But the bonus fact, Tacitus doesn't ever mention the Druids being here, does he? Which Caesar has mentioned. So, and in the introduction of a Tacitus translation I own from the 1940s, he gets very cross with him for not mentioning things that Caesar had, specifically the Druids and the partiality of the Britons for geese.
There's a comment that the weather, I was surprised to learn, it's often rainy.
I'm going to write that down.
So is it Cassius Dio who talks about the Druids? It must be.
Caesar talks about them.
But then the Druids in 60, when Paulinus fights the Druids in the shallows of Anglesey, it's very dramatic. I love that bit.
That's how we like to decide things.
He does. He makes things
It's in
up.
Cassius Dio. Everyone makes things up. I don't know how to tell you this. This is always the way when we have a modern historian. They're always like,
I'm
wait,
shocked. It's a shock to find out. Why doesn't this, can we not cross-check it with another source?
yeah, no. Yeah, they've just made it. Sometimes they're right. I've made all this up. Don't worry about it. And we just accept that. Yeah. I don't know why you lot make it so hard on yourselves. The joyous thing about Tacitus is once he's decided that he's against you, nothing you do is going to win him over. And that is never more obvious than his account in the annals of the Emperor Tiberius, to which we will come shortly. After the Agricola has come out and is well received, Tacitus embarks on history proper, not just biography anymore, but history proper with the text we know as the Histories. This covers the period from 68, that's the death of Nero, to 96, that's the death of Domitian. But we've lost almost all of that. We've got the years 68 and 69. And then Tacitus writes his masterpiece, a text that we know as the Annals because it tells the story of Rome and its empire year by year. Roman history has loads of different influences, earlier Roman and Greek historians, of course, but also the way that records were kept during the Republic was year by year. I think they were held in temples, and so you get a kind of annual report, basically. So that way of looking at the world continues through into the empire, even though it doesn't really matter anymore. You're looking at the reign of an emperor now, but That's not the way Tacitus thinks. The official title of this text was From the Death of the Divine Augustus, but it's been known as the Annals for a really long time. We don't have the complete text, and we're really lucky to have what we have. One medieval manuscript of the first half of the Annals survived, and one medieval manuscript of the second half. I know! So between them we have 40 years out of 54, which is really good going. We have loads on Tiberius. Sadly, we have lost the entire 4 years of Caligula. I mean, it's probably lucky for Radio 4, I'm not gonna lie. I assume it was probably a bit less racy than Suetonius's account, probably a bit more racy than the porn film Caligula. Now Tacitus is writing about people he's not related to and people who aren't still alive. He's writing about the long dead, which he's already said in the Agricola is the safer thing to do. You don't want to write about the living. He says it's too risky. He does suggest there are previous accounts, earlier accounts of these times of Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. He says they're all basically fiction because it was too dangerous to write the truth. So I guess that raises an important question, which is now he's writing about people he's not related to who've been dead for ages. Is it going to be a more impartial account? Well, at the beginning of the Annals, he definitely says he's going to try to. He makes the notorious claim that he will write sine ira et studio without anger or partisanship. So he won't turn on anyone unfairly, and he won't unreasonably big someone up. He so wholly fails to do this, I'm not even sure he actually tries, truthfully. Firstly, I think that's because he is biased. I mean, we're all biased, but he has come of age, politically speaking, during the reign of Domitian, which, according to him and to Suetonius, was a reign of terror. Domitian, famously, used to sit in his office when he was on his own and stab flies with a pen. You know, like wholesome, normal people do. So, a reign of terror, certainly for flies. And Tacitus has huge survivor's guilt because of this. He has survived this terrible reign, probably by doing things that compromised his ethical position, let's say. He has this survivor's guilt. It colours the way that he writes about emperors in general. It colours the way he writes about Tiberius in particular. He must have been popular with Domitian. You know, he becomes consul just after Domitian's died. He's been set up for the role by the emperor he hates. That has to hurt when you're a moral person, and I think he is. The other thing you need to remember is that ancient historians aren't necessarily writing, as we would expect historians to, with the aim of being impartial. For ancient historians, history has a moral purpose, a didactic purpose. We're supposed to be improved by reading it. And so studious neutrality is not that important to them. The important thing is that you learn how to be a better person through reading history. Now, what does it mean when he says he's going to write sine ira et studio? Can you write without being biased?
I tend to agree with you that somebody who's succeeded under the High Roman Empire, under Domitian in particular, can't separate himself from the political system that he's experienced. And I think he goes back to the early history of the empire, so because he realises that's what you've got to understand in order to understand what happens with Domitian.
Dan.
I was very struck with your brilliant stand-up there when you talked about him as a politician coming to the end of his career and wanting to write, thinking obviously, like everybody, that the best period was some sort of golden age, but approximately 140 years ago. Which, interesting, in our period corresponds with the kind of Disraeli, Gladstone, the giants of British liberal democracy. We think that was the best bit. That was when British mentary...
Depends a bit on your agenda.
The British parliamentary system worked at its best, in terms of holding the executive to account and sort of providing far-sighted government. But you certainly deify a slightly more distant part.
I think Tacitus has that joyous double standard that Juvenal does so well of saying everything is awful that's not like this thing, and then when he gets to talking about this thing, he slags off as well.
I also like thinkers who sit down for a long time and work out that the best way of organising society is that people like them should have power.
Yes.
So that's good. So Plato goes, do you know what I think we need? Something kind of a philosopher.
Yeah.
And then Caesar's like, what we need is a muscular military government. Tacitus is like, I think sort of well-educated, senatorial, sort of like, like 19th century sort of government by clever people sitting in the cabinets, that kind of collegial aristocratic government. And it's funny that we all, I often think that the best way of organising this country would be sort of charismatic TV presenters and podcasters just sort of making decisions that one else has to go on with.
I mean, I am prepared to back you on that, as I backed you on Strictly, but I have to be honest, I don't want to. I don't think half-assed classicists should rule.
Many examples recently where people with a rich classical education pro-poor the delivery of the executive branch.
I mean, he definitely wants his readers to share his horror at the Emperor Tiberius, and he uses rhetorical techniques really successfully to try and persuade us. We might not think of this as very historical, but it's definitely fun to read. So, for example, he loves setting up oppositions. Tiberius is a monster, everything he does is wrong, and therefore he needs an enemy who is a sort of saint, and that is Tiberius's nephew, a man named Germanicus, who is completely flawless as far as Tacitus is concerned, and he's always attributing delightful thoughts to Germanicus. He thought this. Did he, Tacitus? Are you sure? It doesn't matter if you're sure. Make it up. Sounds right. Perfect. Germanicus does, of course, die suddenly and relatively young, so obviously, at the very least, Tiberius poisoned him, but probably Livia as well. In doing this, in presenting his history this way, Tacitus creates, I would say, one of the great literary monsters in Tiberius. Actually, he creates several brilliant literary monsters. Nero, Sejanus, Livia, they just keep going. His account is completely compelling. So right from the beginning, when Augustus chooses Tiberius to be his successor, Tacitus says the reason is because Augustus wants to look really good to posterity. So the way you do that is by choosing some absolute rubbish to follow you. Tacitus never gives anyone the benefit of the doubt. And for this, I'm not going to lie, I secretly love him. Even when Tiberius becomes emperor, Tiberius is a sort of notoriously diffident character, and he resists the idea of being emperor for exactly the reasons that Tacitus would resist the idea of an emperor. Tacitus thinks that the senatorial class, the aristocracy, should continue to run Rome as they did in the Republic. Of course, it broke down into civil war and disaster, but gloss over that. Before that, it was fine, and that's the world that Tacitus would like, but it's probably the world that Tiberius would like. When the Senate first come to him around the death of Augustus to say, be our next emperor, he's like, I don't think one person should have all that power. Oh, great, so you're going to be in favour of this, Tacitus. And Tacitus is like, he's just saying that for effect. He lies.
I feel sorry for Tiberius, this card-carrying Roman hero, young man, stabilising the Rhine front, brilliant, brave, charismatic leadership. And then people say to him, appeal to him when he's engaging in activities on Capri which we cannot share on this.
We cannot.
Absolutely cannot. Daytime format. And people go to him and say, can you not muster up some of that youthful figure? And he says, I cannot remember who I was. And that, I think, is one of the most terrible lines I've ever read. It makes you think about aging. It's about becoming a different person as we get older. And that's like
I mean, the thing is, it's the most devastating sentence, and yet when Tacitus describes his time on Capri, he says he built 12 villas, and he spent all his time in terrible licentious behaviour and plotting wrongdoing. Does it bother you that he doesn't mention sources and all the things that we sort of expect from historians? He even more rarely names them. Every now and then he does reference one.
Many references to other historians, don't you? And we think he had access, which is so extraordinary to imagine that he could have accessed the senatorial record, basically Hansard for the Senate, or legal cases. So exciting to think about the source that he would have had available to him. And also so tragic to think about the literal bonfire as all those documents were lost. What 99% of ancient?
97 to 99% of ancient literature gone.
Just extraordinary. It'd be like if we only had Sir J. Cooper tell us about the 20th century.
It's a bit better than that.
No shade on
There's
Cooper.
lots of interesting stuff.
But it would be lovely, of course, if he did say, by the way, I actually got this from the Emperor's memoir.
Yeah.
And then, because we do know, you guys were talking, I'm so fascinated in the texts that we know existed, but we don't have anymore. So Alexander the Great's nephew, I think, wrote an account of his conquests of the Persian Empire. Augustus wrote a memoir, did he? Yeah, and can you imagine that, having Augustus know the idea these sources once existed?
But Tacitus does have access to something incredibly unusual, which is a memoir written by Agrippina the Younger, so something written by a woman. He reports that he's reading that source when he talks about Agrippina the Elder, so she is the wife of Germanicus. And after Germanicus has died relatively young,
Brackets poison.
I mean, she goes to Tiberius and asks to be allowed to marry again because she's still a young woman. And Tacitus says, and I got this from Agrippina the Younger's memoir. It's like, how did you get Agrippina the Younger's memoir? Tell us. Nothing. He's never more interesting from our perspective as Britons than when he shows us what Britain looks like to the Romans in that first century. So a couple of points to at least consider. One, he gives all the best speeches in the Agricola to a Briton named Calgacus, but also the way that the Roman Empire looks to someone in Rome when writing about a place that the Romans are colonizing is absolutely extraordinary.
He issues one of the greatest paeans ever constructed against imperialism, against violent oppression, whilst discussing its merits when it's practiced by his father-in-law. So he was perfect about it.
Yeah.
Puts the greatest critique I've ever read of Roman rule into the mouth of this British leader. To ravage, to slaughter, to usurp under false titles they call empire, and where they make a desert, they call it peace, which is chilling.
Really chilling.
And
But
yes,
Tacitus is the one writing those words.
yes, and he's been a proconsul. He discusses how brilliant when Paulinus put down Boudicca's revolt. He says how effective it was, and they managed to kill tens of thousands of Britons.
It's 10,000 British lives for the cost of 360 Roman lives, and it's like, good work, us.
Yeah, good work, us.
Is it?
We give this wonderful sort of account of what's happened to the British when they've been conquered. They have lots of lovely stuff like they're wearing togas and they're speaking Latin and they've got porticos and baths and the rest of it. And he says, he's got this killer sentence where he says, the idiots, they thought this was humanitas, they thought this was civilization, but it was part of their slavery.
And yet you're left thinking, well, does Tacitus approve of empire or not?
Yeah.
It's my maritime history geekery coming out here.
Uh-oh, here we go.
Yeah. It's actually Britain is brilliant. It's easier to get from Cornwall to Spain. Yeah, well, it is, I find it is an island. But it's easier to get from Cornwall to Spain than it's to get to Cornwall to Cumbria by walking. So actually, we are on the sea until the invention of the railway in 1830. Watch out, I'm losing her. I'm losing her.
No, look at my happy face. I love trains.
Just in that rictus scale. We've been here before. Until the invention of the railway and then the automobile, the land was deeply inaccessible, and water was the bridge. So it is very true that if you live in Cornwall, what is now Cornwall, Devon, Dorset, Spain, was very, very close by to next door.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, but having grown up in Birmingham, I don't really understand the sea. Tiberius might have been monstrous. I'm sure he was in lots of ways. Most people in the past with lots of power were pretty monstrous. But Tacitus will damn him for pretty much anything. A posh but impoverished man comes to him and says, your father Augustus wanted me to have lots of children, so I've had 4 sons who are all now adults, and they are extremely poor because I've squandered all my money. And because it was your dad's idea that we had these children, you should sort of provide them with money. Now, you or I might think, perhaps working for a living, but no. Tiberius grants each of these, I think, 4 young men 200,000 sesterces each. And after that, says Tacitus, he showed them no pity. They don't need pity. They've each got 200 grand. Tiberius, I should say, as depicted by Tacitus, has only scorn for the senatorial class, which is probably why Tacitus finds him so obnoxious. But the way that Tacitus himself depicts them, they are quite worthy of scorn. They are obsequious to the point where Tiberius damns them with a magnificent sentence, O homines servitutem paratos, men ready to be enslaved. And you know what? The reason that Tacitus is so angry here, he says, oh, Tiberius doesn't want a free state. He just scorns them because they're so obsequious. Probably true. But the reason that Tacitus is so angry here is because he has been that man. That's who he was under Domitian, I think, and that's what colours his view of everything that happened before. So, although you won't get an unbiased account of historical events from Tacitus, you will get something else. Astonishing, persuasive writing in incredible Latin. So compelling that he has shaped our understanding of Roman emperors and the rat's nest of first century imperial politics forever. In the words of Racine, Tacitus was the greatest painter in antiquity. Natalie Haynes stands up for the classics, was written and performed by me, Natalie Haynes. My guests were Llewellyn Morgan and Dan Snow, and our producer was the majestic Miss Mary Ward Lowry.
This is BBC Radio 4, where a cult classic is among the subjects of Woman's Hour next. Hearing from Justin Hardy, son of the Wicker Man director Robin Hardy, and his documentary Children of the Wicker Man. And there's also live music from the star of the musical Night with Janis Joplin, Mary Bridget Davis. It's all ahead, just after the news. Escape with a Good Book on BBC Sounds, like Yellowface by Rebecca F. Cromb.
I play up our connection. My grief over her death becomes a cornerstone of my origin story.
Enlightenment by Sarah Perry.
Thomas examined the image of a stone woman stuck on the verges of the lake. I suppose she's in the water now. What is she holding?
And Giovanni's Room by James Baldwin.
Do you have a mistress? I asked her. I don't seem to be very interested in women right now.
Listen on BBC Sounds. BBC News at 10 o'clock. Home Office figures show 703 migrants arrived in the UK after crossing the Channel yesterday. 2 people died attempting the journey. French authorities returned 105 people to Calais after they got into difficulty at sea. The highest daily total this year for small boat arrivals in the UK was 882 people in June. A doctor who treated Valdo Calacane 3 years before he fatally stabbed 3 people in Nottingham warned his mental illness was so severe he could end up killing someone. Speaking to the BBC for the first time, Calacane's mother and brother said it was one of a series of missed opportunities that could have prevented the killings in 2023. Elias Calacane says his family never believed that his brother's psychiatric care in hospital was up to standard.
I don't think it's fair to say that he was ever treated. I don't think he was ever really treated. He was sort of managed. Like, so he had interventions, but with regards to a proper, I guess, treatment plan, I'm not sure that we ever saw that.
The family of the former England cricketer Graham Thorpe revealed that he killed himself after suffering for years with depression and anxiety. It was announced last week that he died at the age of 55. In an interview with The Times, Graham Thorpe's widow, Amanda Thorpe, says she's devastated and that she wants to share his story to try to raise awareness about mental health issues. Thousands of people in Greece have been told to leave their homes because of wildfires near Athens. Dozens of fires broke out over the weekend, fanned by strong winds. More extreme weather is due this week. And Paris has officially waved goodbye to the Olympics after a lively closing ceremony at the Stade de France last night. The city signed off after 19 days of competition, which saw Team GB equal their medal haul from London 2012, with 65 in total. BBC News. In a special edition of Cafe Hope this afternoon on Radio 4, Rachel Burden will be in Southport, hearing from people who helped those affected by the tragic killing of 3 girls in the town and the subsequent riot. That's today at 1:45, just after the Public One. But now it's time for Women's Hour with Nuala McGovern.
Hello and welcome to Women's Hour. Yes, indeed, the Olympics has come to an end. But if you're feeling at a loss, don't worry. Paralympics are just around the corner. Paralympian archer Jodie Grinham will be with us, who's excited to get going in Paris. Jodie is also 26 weeks pregnant. So quite a different picture from 1922, when Frenchwoman Alice Milliat, dubbed the mother of the Olympics, was fighting to have women included in any Olympian sport. We're going to chat about the evolution of women in games in a moment. Also, I want to know, do you have a female athlete that you have become a huge fan of during these Olympics? Who, from where, and why? Here's a few of mine. The GB weightlifter Emily Campbell, for her strength, yes, but also her fabulous humour. The Irish boxer Kelly Harrington, for defining personal success in such uplifting terms she is not defined by the boxing ring. And the sprinter Julian Alfred, for bringing home the first Olympic medal to St. Lucia. Who is yours? Text the programme 84844. On social media, we're at BBC Women's Hour, or you can email us through our website. For a WhatsApp message or a voice note, that number 03700 100 444. Also this hour. The music of Janis Joplin, thanks to Mary Bridget Davies, who will be performing right here in the Woman's Hour studio. And to film. Did you ever watch it? It is a cult classic among horror film fans, but lots of the men involved now very well known. But what about the woman who invested her money to get it made? Caroline Hardy has been left out of its cinematic history. We'll hear why from her son and who intends to write that. Plus, we'll hear about the life and legacy of Susan Wojcicki. She was the CEO of YouTube and she has died at the age of 56. But let us begin with Paris 2024. It was the Olympic Games for the first time in history that saw an equal number of men and women competing. It has not always been the case. In fact, back in 1912, the father of the Olympic Games, Pierre de Coubertin, said that having women compete in the Games would be impractical, uninteresting, ungainly, and he did not hesitate to add, improper. But luckily, the Olympics didn't just have a father. It also had a mother of the Games, who I just learned about, Alice Milliat. BBC Monday's Laura Garcia is here to tell us all about this sometimes forgotten figure behind the Olympics. Good morning. Hope you had a wonderful closing ceremony, Laura, and welcome back to Woman's Hour. Tell us about Alice Milliat.
So just like you, I was really surprised to learn about Alice Milliat's name, because I've been in my preparation to come to the Olympic Games hearing Pierre de Coubertin's name over and over and over again. And in a Games where gender parity has been such a big thing, the Paris Organizing Committee has been trying to kind of rescue the legacy of Alice Milliat. She started out hating sports when she was young, because we have to kind of throw ourselves back to the time where sports for women were really just like gentle stretches and gymnastics, and you have to wear corsets and really restricted clothing. She didn't like it at all. It wasn't until she traveled to the UK and she hung out with a bunch of suffragettes that she realized that the fight for women to participate in sports and kind of move their own bodies and be wearing more free, like liberating clothing, was also a fight for women's rights and freedom. So she became a brave advocate for organized women's sports and fighting to get women to play the same sports as men because they weren't allowed to.
And the words I mentioned there of the father of the Olympics, saying women competing would be impractical or uninteresting. She obviously didn't follow those instructions. What did she do instead?
So instead, she tried to get them to include more women in the Olympics, and after hearing no a million times, she just decided to organize her own games. She was a really good organizer, and she understood the structures of sport. She understood how to make sure that it was press in the stadiums. So she organized the Women Olympics in 1922 in Paris for the first time, and then she organized 3 more because they were an enormous success. And basically the idea was to prove that not only women could compete, but there was interest in women's sports. She managed to get front pages. There's lots of coverage. When I started researching the story, I thought we were really going to struggle to find footage, but there's so much because Alice made sure that it was recorded, that it was on tape, that there was evidence of the fact that not only women can compete exactly the same as men, but also that there's interest and that people would go and watch them.
And what I love to see in that footage that is on one of the videos you have online, Laura, is thankfully in comfortable clothing that they are crossing the finishing lines. The corset has been abandoned.
Yeah, and that kind of happened by side by side. If you think about it, 1922, when she organized the first Women Olympics, a lot of women couldn't even vote. Like women in my country in Mexico couldn't vote until 1953. This was a very visionary fight from her part. And I think it's important also to add that it wasn't just her, right? So Alice led a movement, and there were lots of women that walked with her to get not just organized sports, but understand that a woman's right to do sport in their own time for their mental health, to participate and compete, was super, super important. And then eventually people started listening to her and her colleagues, and in 1928, they allowed women to compete in track and field for the first time in Amsterdam. But as we have seen, it's taken us then a whole lot of time to get to
100 years.
Parity. Yeah.
So interesting. But she was also one of the 10 statues of women that were featured in the opening ceremony of the Games. I suppose maybe France trying to bring recognition to some lesser known women. Tell us what we saw.
So we saw in the opening ceremony, which seems now like a completely different universe ago, even though it was only 2 weeks ago, we saw this wooden statues that came out of the river, like you say, to rescue the stories of these women. It's not like they have to make them up. These women have been there and have always been fighting for different parts of inclusion. And you might recognize now Alice Miliat's name, and hopefully we'll keep saying hers alongside Pierre de Coubertin. But also, for example, Simone de Beauvoir, the poet and author and philosopher, Alice Guy, who is a film director, the women who are also kind of scattered across the ages to represent that this kind of fight isn't A, new, and B, hasn't gone anywhere.
I like also Jeanne Barrette, explorer and botanist. She was the first woman to circumnavigate the globe, disguised as a man, to accompany a botanical expedition in the 18th century. And I suppose all of that really trying to tie into that theme of gender parity for the athletes, I should say, at the Olympics, because definitely still not there when it comes to some of the upper echelons, either in the federations or coaches.
Yeah, and I think it's important to remember that, like, gender parity is just a number, and we have to look at the structures around athletes, the support that they get. Another first in this Olympics is the first time that we've had a nursery in the Olympic Village, but that was an initiative started by an athlete who is a mother and who said, why shouldn't there be facilities for parents, in plural, men and women, to be able to spend time with their children, right? And that front and center of making gender parity a part of the games was palpable, from making sure that women's sports were in the same primetime spots as some of the men's. But yeah, when you look at the sidelines and athletes go and join their teams, a bunch of the coaches are men. Many of the presidents of the National Olympic Committees are men. In Latin America, the region that I